Hi, everyone. Today, I'm joined by a guest who is here to help me unpack something that has been taking up quite a lot of headspace of mine, I'd say, over the last year. And that really stems from this place of thinking all of this diversity, equity, inclusion lark. Are we going about it all wrong? Is this an opportunity to blow it all up and try something totally new? Or am I being completely impatient about this and this is all par for the cause? And so my context for that is, as those of you who listen regularly to Unbiased over the past couple of years, it was really focused on people shifting the needle in diversity and equity and inclusion and really addressing the biases that sat around them and that they had to overcome. And kicking off this new season, I'm trying to look a bit more internally. What about the biases that actually hinder ourselves from making the changes that we need to make in our own lives to succeed or be the best versions of ourselves? And kind of bringing this together with my work in DEI, it's kind of left me with more questions than answers, as is often the case. And it's coming from a place where I moved from a pure corporate role into DEI much more squarely when DEI was a really big zeitgeist movement. The beginning of COVID in 2020, the US had driven the Black Lives Matter movement to new levels after unfortunate tragedy of George Floyd's death. And after all of that investment, after all of that momentum, we're finding ourselves right now at a place and time of DEI fatigue. There's this perception in the corporate world that we surely have dealt with all of those DEI issues now because there is just so much talk about it. And yet the data would suggest that not that much has actually shifted in favor of inclusion since then. And we've tried so many things. We're coming from so many angles, from creating a business case for DEI, collecting data, sharing data and metrics. We're coming at it from doing the right thing, from moving with the times, from trying to bring cultural change around us into our corporate organizations. And amidst the DEI fatigue from those who are digging their heels in, there is mass burnout and fatigue amongst those in the profession. So I just want to unpack all of this. And joining me to do so is my guest, Charu Srivastava. Now, Charu and I met a little over a year ago at a DEI conference where we were both speaking. And we connected over some of these issues and we've chewed the fat on a lot of this stuff going forward. But Charu's expertise comes to us as a corporate communications and a strategic communications professional. She spent close to 2 decades in this industry, and she's co-founder of her own agency with 2 others called Charu & Co. here in Singapore. She has won numerous awards across the industry. She's worked in this industry across the globe. And alongside this, she is the chair of the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Committee of the PRCA, one of the regional communications industry bodies. So, Charu, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Darcy. Thank you for having me.
I know there's loads to unpack here. And as I said, we've spoken about various aspects of this topic, Charu, on different occasions. But when I thought of you for this, there was these really strong 2 angles of, yes, your commitment to DEI, but also I'm like, okay, here's someone that works in comms. She helps people sell a message. And have we been doing something wrong with messaging it, which was a new angle for me that I wanted to explore with you. And kick us off, though, Charu, as you know, I've laid a lot out there for you, but I want to know from your perspective, what is it that drives you personally to dedicate so much of your spare time to diversity and equity and inclusion?
Yeah, no, I was listening very intently to the opening because it's very personal. It really hits close to home. As you said, that's why we actually connected and that's how we bonded as well. Similar to you, but also, I guess, in my own unique way. It's something that's very, very personal to me. I really went into this full on during the COVID pandemic, surprisingly or not, I guess, because a lot of people had their time to have internal reflections and introspections as well. And it was similar for me. And I think what really was turning point was the time that I had at hand to look at my life and my life experiences and the things that I have been through, the path that I've walked in my personal and professional journey to date, and really give it the sense of stepping back a little and looking at it with a fresh pair of eyes. And I realized how much I have experienced, whether it's discrimination or not, both ways, for who I am, and not just as a female or an Indian, but many other aspects of my personality and who what makes me me. And that kind of, I guess, not realization but actualization of being like this is part of who I am. Because for a lot time of my life it's been, yeah, those are the issues, but let's just move on and get on with life and get to what we need to do. COVID gave me the time to pause and be like, why should I just move on? Why should I not tackle these issues? Because a lot of that also, in a way, was interplaying with my mental health. So it kind of came together. And when, like you said, the PRCA APAC committee came up, that was a time when they put out a call for people to volunteer and be part of the committee. And it all kind of came together at the same time. That's what happens, the confluence of all the factors that come together. And it just gave me another pause to be like, what do I want to do with all this realization or, these lived experiences that I've had in my life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I realized that I really want to talk about it, to shed light to it. Because a lot of the conversations, and this is my personal thing, is that it's very West centric. It's very out there, but not us. And I really wanted to relook and break that thinking and lift the curtain up and have those conversations here, whether it's Singapore, whether it's Asia, and really be honest and open. I think I had a surge of bravery, which sounds a bit silly now when I think about it, but I just felt like I had to step up. And if I didn't step up, then do I wait for someone else to step up for me? It was about stepping up for myself. And I think that was the start of the entire journey. And then I just started being very vocal about it, whether it was writing articles, whether it was, speaking at panels, doing keynotes. I mean, that's how we met, and just being brutally honest. I think that honesty, in my perspective, is what has been missing in these conversations, especially in this part of the world for many reasons, cultural reasons, just the way we've been brought up, and the secrecy over the entire conversation. So there's a lot of that. Oh, let's not talk about it in full detail. Like, the good thing to do is to talk, but not too much. It's good to discuss the issue, but not the gory details. So it was like, well, let's stop doing that. Let's stop tiptoeing around the issue, but get into it proper. And that's what led me down that path. That I think speaking about these things, as I spoke more, I also started getting messages from people who reached out to me here, having heard me talk or having read my articles or, talking about my story itself. And that gave me even more of that validation that I am on the right path. I am helping raise the curtain on these issues, and I should continue doing it gave me extra energy, I guess you could say, even when some days it feels tiring, and it is tiring. Sometimes you talked about the burnout, but I think receiving those messages, it's amazing. It's been now maybe 3 years that I've been doing this in a very conceited kind of manner with full attention and energy. And every time till date, and I do anything, any initiative, the outpouring of support that I receive, many times still on DM, still behind the scenes, because there is still that fear of speaking out in public platforms. So I think for me, it just reminds me that what I'm doing is needed, and there's still a need for those conversations, there's still a need for those initiatives, and there's still a need for me to do what I'm doing, which is what keeps me going beyond my day job. So yeah, that's what keeps me still passionate and still going.
I hear such personal, intrinsic motivations that drive that part of who you are, and to open up and be that whole person more publicly from you. And that is such an important point to remind all of ourselves from, that actually when you need to find energy to do stuff, if it's really a big part of who you are and if you're really intrinsically motivated to do so, then that's actually something that brings
Yeah.
sustainability to what you do on a
Yeah.
personal level. But also listening to you, Charu, I may be reminded of why I think this has caused me a lot of confusion over the last year. And that's probably could be directly linked to the fact that I made this move location wise
Yeah.
from, well, the West. We say Australia is not technically the West, but it is for our purposes,
Yeah.
and born and raised in the UK, and moved here to live here in Singapore. And when we met, it was at this time when I was speaking at conferences around this region and really unpacking the nuance that lies at a corporate DEI level, because of the fact that within this region you have many, many different countries, each with their own cultural norms, each throwing in deep personal differences between how we operate over here as compared to the West. And this really strikes you when you're coming into this corporate space, because you may be actually working for companies, for these multinational companies who are headquartered out in the US or in the UK. And so people in Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand might be getting Black Lives Matter emails into their inboxes and not really knowing what to do with that, because how do we translate that over here? And it speaks to, I think, a lot of the learning and unlearning that I had to do to just kind of understand that whilst on one hand, there's probably not even a shared understanding of what diversity, equity, and inclusion is at any one level. On the other hand, usually one particularly, the biggest or loudest person and voice or organization in the room will share that one view. And then when it doesn't sit well with everyone, then it's going to inevitably cause more polarization and more kind of this them and us. And that's entirely the world that we're living in right now. Is just everything feels polarized, and therefore it feels like inequality is just getting exacerbated as a result. And so I suppose, are we looking at this at DEI, and is the cause for this overwhelm because I might be making it into far too big of an issue, and when I say too big of a problem to tackle, and therefore we need to actually break it down to something that is much more personal, that is much more based on our own communities, and just do what we can in our own sphere of influence. It's part of the problem that we just need to have the answer to everything and be able to share it on social media and give a hack for it, and then it's job done. What are your thoughts, both from a personal perspective and actually in your work in communications, Charu?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good question. I think in my time so far, one of the things that I've definitely accepted, and I think it really is about acceptance, is that there is no quick pill that's going to fix this situation. You talked about how you saw the differences in this region. As someone who's, been in Singapore so many years, as I embarked on this journey, I've even I had those learning experiences of exploring this region from that DEI lens. And I think that's something that is sorely missing, even as we try to get that one band-aid that's going to fix the problem. And I think acceptance that is not ever going to happen is what has opened up that, I guess, that urgency in a sense of, why isn't anything happening? Why aren't I, achieving something? Because it's not about that one quick pill or that one TikTok hack that's going to change everything. I feel like it's about looking at things one step at a time, or even a piece by piece. You talked about the community. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm actually very focused with the Communications and the Public Relations Association, the PRCA, because for me, that's something that I know I can talk about it a little bit more in detail, I think those lived experiences, those personal experiences, do allow anyone who's trying to come in to tackle or at least talk about a situation in a more authentic manner. Because if you're coming in from the outside, sometimes you don't understand the full nuance of it. And that's the other thing about DEI. It's extremely nuanced, not just country to country, region to region, but industry to industry, community to community. And, trying to capture all of that in one brushstroke is just not going to happen. So taking those bite sizes of effort across different slices and dices, I think is the way to get some effort in the right way. And that kind of snowballs, right? Those little pieces, people talk, different leaders share their networks, those conversations start happening a bit more openly. I think those things then give a bit of a snowball effect, right? And then it kind of gives courage to someone else to talk about it. Some leader sitting somewhere else is going, hey, I heard this happening in my industry. Maybe someone sitting in the West saying, I heard this in my industry in Asia. That actually makes a lot of sense. So let's stop doing this top-down approach to it and actually start looking at it in a more real manner, what's local and what's needed on the ground. That could then trigger a much more effective discourse than trying to be everyone should do this. And then you're like, but even that is a generalization. Even Asia is not one. Even Singapore is not one. It's not homogenous, right? Different industries have its own issues in DEI. So we can't apply what's with the legal sector that you're familiar with the comm sector that I'm familiar with. They're both very differently made up. Our requirements, for people who are in the industry are different, that lead to different situations, different issues. So I think even that, in a way, is a realization we need to have as people who might try to affect real change from a DI perspective in what we do. Because I think not identifying that is just holding ourselves back to actually moving forward.
Yeah. How do we translate that into... So I'm thinking now about, well, does DEI therefore need a bit of a rebrand? Or if we were to try, if we're going to call now almost like this bit of a stalemate where we're not quite understanding, or maybe in denial of the complexity of it all, and we just want to know. Because in order to get, when you're making a business case for anything, you need to be able to show metrics, you need to be able to show outcomes. And as soon as we start to say, well, small micro momentum from just your own community, someone way upstairs starts to tune out and go, we need to have the, I need a big ticket number that I can then sell in. So how would you do this differently, Charu? Or how would you push the angle of really communicating the importance of that micro change to actually being the answer?
I totally understand the apprehensions people might have, but I think looking at it as a micro change is not fair, because let's say we look at our industries, right, and we talk about that, in their own, they're huge, right? So we're not saying do it with like 5 people. We're talking about a much bigger community of companies, organizations, and everyone else that comes in that ecosystem. So it's really more about, let's not look at, let's say, we want to make Singapore a DEI perfect country, right? It's more like, let's break it down. Which are the industries? Let's tackle it industry by industry. And going back to my point about the nuances within industries, that also actually leads to the matrix of measure of success, right? Because if your metric for success is aligned to the nuance, then you're actually working towards something that's tangible and actually relevant to that industry, which is exactly what we do when we work with clients in any kind of project. It's more about, what do you want to achieve? I can't give you a solution to something that's generic. It's more about what's your specific outcome that you would like to achieve, or the specific challenge you're trying to overcome. It's almost looking at it from a lens of, we talk about how we can't take West and apply to East. It's the same thing. You can't take legal industry and apply to communications industry. So if we look at it from that lens, we're actually setting ourselves up for success, because we're being more specific. It also then gets people at leadership as well who would be more compelled to it. You talked about, in the opening, we've talked there's been so much conversation about, oh, it's not just a checkbox exercise, there's actual tangible benefits, and there's this and that. But imagine if we can talk about it more specifically to say, oh, if we did this initiative, we might actually be able to attract back this many lawyers who have taken a break and not come back, and that combats our issue of talent, and so it's then becomes real to the industry. So what's the industry's issue? So similarly with comms, for instance, if I give you an example, there's a lot of talk about how we keep losing people after the senior level because it's either too discriminatory or they don't even reach that level. The diversity is not there. It's very challenging. So that is talking about how do we sustain this industry without having to keep retraining talent. And it also is about the work we do. I'm a big believer that the people who are thinking of strategies and campaigns and ideas, if it's all being done by the same profile of people, they can't speak for the people they're trying to communicate with in its entirety, especially for DEI. If I were to sit here and plan policies for people with physical disabilities, I'm not equipped, but I am neurodiverse, so I might be able to share my perspectives when it comes to having conversations around policies that support people with neurodiversity in the workplace. So I think from that lens, when you talk about the communications or the advertising and the marketing agencies, and then we go to that industry and say, your work is going to get better if you get diversity truly in the workplace. That is a very compelling reason. Might not be the same for, let's say, another industry, which is in manufacturing. They'd be like, I just need someone to help us with the technical stuff. I don't need to have that representation to that level in my workplace. So then it's a different thing. How do we tackle that situation? How do we tackle their challenges that they're facing? Maybe the challenges are very different to what we have. So it's almost breaking it down to that level and setting it up for, like I said, success that is real to the industry. And I truly believe as it gets embedded, I think that's the other thing we need to move towards is embedding DEI as almost like a daily air we breathe. The DNA of any company, the DNA of any person. That's, of course, an ideal situation. I would love to reach that one day. But if we look at it that way, then it becomes almost a part of work. Another example I can share in the industry that I'm with, now it's some countries, some regions, it hasn't been fully kind of pushed out everywhere. But companies are actually putting out DEI requirements for vendors. So when they're looking for vendors, they're like, you need to have these checklists and this requirement that we have for you as a DEI, matrix. So that's also a compelling push for then the vendors to do it. I'm always in two minds with those kind of things. It's like the quota issue, whether that helps because are you just doing it again to check a box or what's required? But it's a start to show that it's not just good to have. It's a business need specific to the industry.
Yeah.
To survive, you must do it. If not, survival is at stake. So I think if we look at it from that lens, it makes it a lot more real, relevant. And I've had conversations in the past where people are like, why do you keep talking about female gender equality when if you look at the communications industry, we are majority women. So
Right.
So again, it's like, okay, why do we keep harping on this? Why? Oh, it's not relevant. It's not relevant. So again, you have to look at it from, I think, a closer, nuanced lens and not just broad strokes, because it might not be the same for every industry, every community, every country, whichever way you want to slice and dice it up.
Yeah. I think that reminder of contextualizing and making it specific, it's having your niche, that's, I know it comes a lot in, in the entrepreneurship world and building your business. And even probably my own journey into moving into inclusion and coaching within the legal industry. It's like, you can't be all things to all people. So what is it that you do know? Who is it that you can serve, and and then you're only having to talk to that niche of whether it's industry, of people, of community, you can then tailor what inclusion or performance or what those efforts mean to them. That's something I can definitely get on board with. And I think that changes, it almost helps to change the lens at which everyone is looking at that issue. I'm wondering whether actually that is one way of breaking through some of that polarization, because once you niche in, you're starting to actually address all the commonalities that
Yeah.
exist. It's almost like saying, right, because when we need to know what is missing, we need to know what we do have, and we need to understand, oh, okay, what, like you say, actually, okay, in comms, there's a majority women. So actually, just because the world is talking about gender equality, actually to get real inclusion in our industry, we've actually got some of that bit sorted. And so what can we bring as
Yeah.
the community that we have to
Mm.
tackle some of the other gaps? That's a really, I suppose, and what that gets me onto next. And I think you mentioned it in part of your response about what is it about us? Like, what is it that we need, and what are our interest? We're self-interested, or, you know, how do we actually get to this space of understanding that going for inclusion and building on fairness, on equity, isn't like this zero-sum game. This is not about just, oh, you have to do the right thing, you know,
Yeah.
or, you know, to your point about policy, you know, I'd see a real space actually for what might seem as box ticking to say, right now we have to go and check our data because a
Yeah.
vendor has asked us to attest to these things. I do think these are the ways that we embed it so that in generations to come, it's just done without thinking. But is there something to say, you know, we all have, there's the right thing to do something, and there's the real reason that we're self-interested
Yeah.
and motivated to do something. Is it wrong to go to someone's base self-interest in order to affect change, in your view?
I mean, we are humans, and I don't think it's anything wrong, because as humans, we do always have a survival instinct. So self interest does come into play. Of course, if we make it from, I think, those lived experiences that we go through or we hear about, we talk about, which goes back to being around a diverse group of people. Because if you're in an echo chamber, you don't even understand what are some of the challenges and situations out there. So I think self interest is good, because in a way, it's also self interest for self, if that makes sense, in the sense that I don't want to fix this problem just for myself, but I want to fix it because I want to be surrounded by people who are happy, who have equal opportunity. So that's my selfish reason. It's not just that I want to be happy and perfect, but my happiness is also linked to seeing a world or my industry which is now going to be fairer, more inclusive, and have those things out there. I think if I speak again from experience when I set up Tryon with my co-founders, we had those conversations because, the three of us are very different. As I said, female-centric, there are 2 out of 3 who are female. But even amongst the 3 of us, there's so much more to us than just our genders, right? We have race difference, we have background difference, we have neurodiversity difference. So bringing that and having that sense of, if we are that difference in a group of 3, how much more difference is there in the community, in the industry, and how can we then help solve that issue? And for just share, I think a couple of days back, I had an intern talk to me. She asked me, "Hey, can I just ask, is it important to have a master's degree for the industry?" And I just went, no, like, absolutely not. But that's also background and educational diversity. Why is there this sense that, oh, if I don't have a master's degree, I can't succeed in the industry? There's no need for that. And if you put that in as a requirement, you're already discriminating against people who don't have that. And sometimes,
Yeah.
with the title of your podcast, it's a bias we don't even realize we have. And sometimes it's a bias that's just been there for years. No one's decided to even look at it or to change it or to question it. Sometimes we don't even see it as a bias. You're like, yeah, that's a requirement. But is it? So I think that self-interest part for me, you need to have something that's going to make it real and not just another piece of process to go through. I think when we break it down to such clinical terms, it's going to be much harder. At this point, at least, where we are, where it's not, unfortunately, as top of mind as you would like it to be, there needs to be something more. And I think personal motivation is always going to be way more effective and powerful than someone wagging their finger in your face and telling you to do it. We've all worked with people who we could try that for anything and they'll still not do what you want them to do. So it's the same with the, you need to have something more that's getting you excited, that passion, or even just a sense of doing the right thing for whatever reason. I'm not judging. As long as you are doing
Yeah.
the right thing at the
Yeah.
end of the day, I think that's what's important.
Do you have any tips from your experience on how to help bring other people that may be more skeptical, that maybe haven't bought into this, or maybe that have benefited from the status quo being as it is? As you said, there's just so many biases at play here. How do you connect with someone that doesn't share your point of view or who doesn't see that same need, to try and kind of to get around that, or to try to articulate it in a way that you can speak to what their need might be to support your own agenda?
Yeah. It's a very important question to think about. And I think one of the ways to do it is to have compassion and also to be open to the aspects of DEI. It's not just gender, it's not just, race, it's not just religion. There's so many things that make us different. We might be standing in a room full of all equal on paper, but you dig in further, everyone has something that makes them different. That's why we are individuals. And I think having that realization is going to help people to understand that DEI is not just that superficial level conversations. That has dominated the scene for a long time. Not bad, but I think when we look at things differently with different lenses and different layers of DEI, then you start realizing that I might think that there's no issue, but I myself have actually had those situations in which I might have been discriminated for whatever reason. I think if you can talk to someone in that way, and again, having compassion in those conversations is important. You can't force someone to think and feel what you're feeling. But if you can show them and take them down that road of maybe self-awareness at some point, and going back to, I think personally, I feel that own motivation is so important. So if you can show that, demonstrate that, sometimes just conversations that lead to a aha, oh my God, that moment is important. I have a colleague in the industry who's, white British man in leadership. Sounds perfect. And then he's like shared with us that education is his biggest area of passion because educational diversity is something he has personally witnessed on the other end of it because he wasn't from that educational background that people expected someone of his caliber in the industry to be from. So again, on paper, you're like amazing, perfect life, no discrimination, living the dream world. And then you're like, oh wow, okay, I get that. And I think the compassion part is important because if you go in with a sense of, look, I know who you are, I know you've lived a life of privileges, and that's it. I can't have a conversation with you. You can't even start. But if you go in with let me share your story, what do you have to share? And then you realize there's so much that comes out. People have had such varied experiences from different aspects that you have to go in with an open heart and an open mind and have that conversation. Sometimes people want to talk about it, but they're scared of how they're going to be perceived. And I've had another conversation with a colleague who's, can't remember exactly, but I think she's born and brought up in Hong Kong, and she's British. So for her, she gets discriminated in the sense that people think she's a foreigner and she doesn't know what she's doing there. And you don't tell me what to do. And she's like, I'm more local than many of you are who have come from other parts of Asia. She's more Asian. She's more, of a Hong Konger. And when I was speaking to her, I was like, wow, I never would have thought of that as a discrimination. So it really, I think having conversations are so important. And when I had the conversation with her, she was scared to speak up because she's like, but I'm still perceived as a white woman in Asia. I'm like, yeah, but if you don't tell your story, that will continue. So telling your story is going to give people a bit of a pause and be like, I can't judge everyone with what I think is perfect because, it's very well said that you never know what someone's going through. But I think it's the same for DEI. You never know what someone's DEI background is. personally. And if we go with that mindset, then I feel like you can have better conversations. Of course, it's not going to be easy all the time, but if you go with that, and I think from a personal perspective, that would be it from individuals. But with companies, it's also talking about what are your business challenges. Let's break it down. Let's talk about what's the personnel issue, and that might then slowly unravel into something that might be in the DEI umbrella, and then that's the opportunity to talk about, well, we see that problem. How can we solve it? What's the underlying issue? Is it something that can be tweaked by mindset change, and that's top down? Policy change, again, top down, but full adoption on down, not just them still being scared to enact policy because they still don't know whether it's okay or is it just, yeah, fine, you know. So all those things really come into play, but I feel like those are the things that I personally have seen to have worked, and in my experience with all the things I've been doing in these years.
Thank you for, I feel like, Charu, you've sort of brought us back full circle to that, the personal intrinsic motivation. That themes resonate so well because then there's something in it for everyone, which is the whole point of DEI, that it's there to create a platform for everyone. And it's also touched on a topic which I feel like you're going to have to come back on for another session, but I feel like this is one that's going to be this strand and theme that pervades this podcast, alongside when we're thinking about biases and who we are as people, is actually, particularly in this DEI context, how much are all these labels that we put on ourselves and other people, and these psychological shortcuts that sometimes we need to be able to take to siphon through all this information. But in some ways, I feel like the very thing that DEI is striven to do is also made quite exclusive by creating this understanding that DEI is for certain categories of underrepresented people: color, race, gender, sexual orientation. And that doesn't leave room for, your white woman born and raised in Hong Kong, and the white man that looks and dresses the part but has actually come from a lower socioeconomic background or not had the education. And to your point, it's about the stories that sort of unravel all this stuff about people. And I have been, like, my mind has been blown on several occasions moving to this region, thinking that, I'm really up on a lot of this stuff. And to your very point, I'd meet people that until I knew their story, I had made a snap judgment about them, or at least, I'd put a label on them as, oh, they must, and I've asked them which part of the UK they've come from, and they've never lived in the UK, but they have this British accent from an international school, and things like that. And so I certainly love the idea of just leaving people thinking about, what's your story? And I've shared this often. I hate this. Who are you? What do you do? Where are you from? The perfect question for me is what's your story? To open that discussion and to really understand and create this sense that inclusion is about literally everyone and every single person, not categories of people, not creating more avenues or more reasons to have a them and us mentality. And maybe in some ways what you've done is dissipate that kind of existential crisis of, there's social inequality. There are so many culturally ingrained things and structures. And yes, all of this is about that. But what we're inviting people to do here is to say, that's just too big an issue to take on and in of itself. So what can we control? Who are we? What is our story? And how do we relate to other people and their stories, and each kind of take your patch on? And of course, and as you mentioned, a lot of these things are easier said than done. And we are all it's all kind of part of the journey. And in some ways, I just sort of find this check-in as a bit of a moment to dissipate all of the big ticket things that are going on around us. But to leave us, Charu, today, as you know, this podcast is called UNBiased, and it's about kind of tackling and addressing the biases that exist around us and ourselves. And I think in addressing some of these big problems, we almost should have more questions than answers. And so I want you to leave us with an unanswered question that you have. And this is unanswered despite however many experts they may be weighing in on the topic.
I think firstly, I would just wanted to make a comment on the previous part that you shared. I think the one thing that I always get very riled up about is discrimination within DEI, which is just hilarious, right? Because why are we discriminating against people and who deserves? And I think that leads to the question as well, right? Who are we to judge who gets the DEI support or which cause gets the DEI support? Everyone is equal. It's not them against us. And for me, that's always a big thing about how are we going about doing this? Are we in the efforts that we are trying to create actually ignoring and discriminating and excluding certain people, certain groups? Or are we truly going for something that is real and honest and for everyone in a real way and not just tokenism and like, oh, look, I've done it for this community, this group, and this label. Job done. Done. That's it. I'm done. And so how do we do that? How do we ensure that as we go down the DI journey, we don't get blinded by the biases that we don't even realize we have? And the biases, as you said, against who gets the DEI support, whose causes to be fight, and whose causes are worthy. Is one cause worthy than another? And I feel like it's a big question, but with everything we've discussed as well, as we do this, as I said, maybe small bites and small sizes, it's still something we need to work towards, but it's something to have at the back of our mind that with what we're doing, are we creating more discrimination, more inequality, more inequity, more exclusion through our efforts of actually trying to create DEI? And it's a very, very tricky question.
So, Charu, I think as a question to leave guests with, does DEI actually create more exclusion? Is one that I not only want to leave out there, but I feel like you're going to have to come back on, and this is something I'd love to explore, because it's something I have loads of thoughts on as well. Yeah. It's something that I've explored a bit in the podcast where I spoke to someone called Daisy Mann in Australia, and we actually spoke about this concept of, she calls it the left eating the left. But in particular, there was some research that within, like politically left-leaning and liberal groups, we tend to fight amongst ourselves much more and call each other out a lot more, versus typically politically right-wing people who will really, really focus on, beating the other guy, and we will let things slide within our own group. And I think when it comes to actually that question of DEI needing a rebrand, this is could be very much connected with it. So it's both a question that I would usually just end on, but it's one where it's hit something in me that feels like, Charu, we should come back and talk about this again. Thank you so much, Charu.
Thank you for having me. It was a wonderful conversation, and I'll be happy to come back again.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. I derive so much energy from speaking to such inspiring guests and having really meaningful and challenging conversations. If you felt the same way, my ask of you is to please subscribe to this podcast, either here or wherever you download your podcast content from. Unbiased is a labour of love for me, and the impact that these perspectives have depend on reaching as many eyes and ears as possible. So your support is invaluable. Until next time, stay curious.